Welcome to a new video on the Photography Minimalist. Before I get started on this very interesting camera, I would like to say that I hope that you're all staying safe and looking out for each other during this terrible corona crisis situation. Just a small side note, I have a very boring background at the moment. That's because I'm remodeling this room, and I hope to present you with a much more interesting background to look at in the next video. This video is all about the Yashica G Electro 35, and there's a lot to tell you with regards to this camera. And I can imagine that not everybody has the patience to listen to me for 8 minutes, so I thought I would make a short summary first, and then you decide after the summary if you want to go into 8 minutes of detailed information or jump directly to the results I was able to achieve and my conclusion on using this camera. I'll set the time here in the corner so you know where to go after this short summary. This specific model of the Yashica Electro 35, the G series, was built in 1968. It's the second model in the Electro 35 lineup. Yashica started in 1966 manufacturing the Electro 35. It is a true rangefinder 35mm format camera. It has an internal metering system and a fixed 45mm 1.7 to f16 lens. The viewfinder corrects for parallax, making it a very interesting camera, for example also for portrait photography. The camera on top and when looking through the viewfinder provide you with an over or under exposure warning. And as an accessory, this camera came with 2 adapter lenses, a wide angle and a telephoto adapter, which both I'll be using in this video. So now it's time for you to make your choice. Either you go through 8 minutes of me talking in detail about this camera, or jump directly to the results and my personal conclusion. Let's have a closer look at the Yashica Electro 35. The model I have here is the G series, which was manufactured in 1968. Yashica actually started off manufacturing the Electro 35 in 1966, making this G series model the second model that came out. These early models can be easily identified by looking at the bottom plate of the camera, where we have a recessed bottom plate. A first important thing to point out is the fact that these cameras were built to be used back in the day with a mercury battery. These mercury batteries are not available anymore. I'm using this Photo Special V164PX 5.6 volt battery in the camera at the moment, but you can also buy an adapter to put in an alternative battery. An interesting and important thing to point out is the fact that this camera automatically corrects parallax. So when you focus on your subject with the focusing ring on the lens and you look through the viewfinder, then you can see the framing automatically adjust depending on your focus distance. So this means that you're always able to make a correct composition. Let's first have a look at the front of the camera, where we can easily identify that it is a G series Yashica 35 Electro. We have the viewfinder and the parallax correction for the viewfinder, and also the built-in light meter. We can also identify the 45mm Yashica DX 1.7 lens, which is a fixed lens on this Electro 35. When we have a look at the top plate, we can see the film rewind, the cold shoe, the indicator lights for over and under exposure. We here have a dial for the ISO or the DIN of your film, the shutter release button of course, which has a locking mechanism, and the film advance lever and a frame counter. Now the back of the camera, where we can of course see the viewfinder and also a battery check And this little button here with the ring on the outer side has a recess so that you can fit your fingernail into the recess to press the button, and then you see the green light, which is on at the moment, meaning that the battery is in full working condition. When we look underneath the camera, we see the battery compartment, the tripod mount, and the film rewind button. And of course, as I mentioned before, the recess in the bottom plate indicating that this is an early Electro 35 model. And to open the back, we have a lifting lever here on the side of the camera. When we look on the left hand side of the camera, we see the PC sync connector for an external flash. When we have a closer look at the lens, we can see that we have a B for bulb mode, an auto mode, and a flash mode. Putting it to B mode, of course, you determine, as long as you compress the shutter release, the time that the shutter is actually opened. And when you put it to auto mode, it has an aperture priority mode, so you select the aperture from 1.7 ranging all the way to f16, and the camera determines the appropriate shutter speed. The shutter speed range from 1 second to 1/500th of a second, and the interesting thing about this camera is that it also shoots any shutter speed necessary in between. So for example, a 1/133 shutter speed is a possibility, making it a very accurate system with regards to light metering. Of course, we also have a depth of field scale, and we have a focusing ring. Like I mentioned, the camera has an under or over exposure indicator, both on top of the camera and also when you look through the viewfinder. At the moment, this camera is set to 100 ISO because I loaded a film of Agfa 100 ISO black and white film that I'm going to be using in this camera. So for example, if I was to press down this shutter, then you will see that the indicator light with regards to underexposure lights up. It is indicated as slow, meaning that I need to use a tripod or a sturdy surface to make the picture. The Yashica Electro 35 had two adapter lenses which you could purchase as an accessory. One is the Tele photo adapter, which is on the right hand side, and the other one is the wide angle adapter on the left hand side. The wide angle adapter actually has a magnification of 0.8 with regards to the 45mm standard lens, bringing it down to a 37.7mm wide angle lens. The Tele adapter lens had a magnification of 1.3 on the 45mm fixed lens, giving it a focal length of 58.4, a short telephoto lens. Both of these adapters screw on to the 55mm thread on the fixed 45mm lens. An important thing to note is that the largest aperture that you can use on both these adapting lenses is f4 and not the 1.7 on the fixed 45mm lens. For example, this is what the Tele adapter looks like when it is attached to the fixed lens on the Electro 35. And the way you work this lens is by first of all focusing on your subject with the focus ring on the 45mm lens. So for example, if we have focus to a distance of 6 meters or 20 feet, afterwards we look at the adapter scale, and it says when we focus on 6 meters or 20 feet, 6 meters for example, bring the focus ring back to 3 meters. So after you focused and check the scale, then we are supposed to bring the focus ring back to 3 meter or 10 feet. That's how you work with these two adapter lenses. Another interesting accessory which you could buy for the Electro 35 was the auto up close-up adapting lens. For this specific model you also had a silver colored version, but both of them work of course. But if you're a true collector, for this specific model you would be needing the silver colored version. So now for my conclusion, after shooting a roll of Agfa APX 100 ISO film through this camera. Well, I think Yashica would have had a perfect camera back in the day if they put on a fixed 35mm lens instead of a 45mm lens, and also offered a full manual mode. Then, as far as I'm concerned, they would have had a killer camera. The 45mm just isn't wide enough to use without the adapter when you're out on the street making photos. And sometimes you want to compensate for your exposure. And the only way to do that with this camera, having its aperture priority, whereby the camera selects the correct shutter speed, is by changing the ISO level and more or less manipulating your metering system to think there's another ISO level film in your camera. It is a workaround, it can work, but I would have preferred a manual mode. It is quite a sharp 45mm lens, which is fine. It's also a very bright lens at 1.7. The viewfinder is very bright also, and it's easy to focus on your subject even in low light situations. The focusing ring is very smooth, the aperture ring is absolutely fine. So there's not much to complain about this camera. It is a little bit large and a little bit heavy when walking around taking photos, so that's maybe a little bit of a disadvantage. But besides that, it is a very capable camera. When using it with the adapter lenses, I prefer the wide angle adapter, even though it goes only to 37.4, which I can really appreciate when I'm outside making photos. So in that sense, all in all, it's a fine camera, and I'm going to be using it much more often after putting this first roll of film through the camera. So that's the whole video on the Yashica G Electro 35 back from 1968. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, you're more than welcome to do so to keep up to date with all my new videos. Stay safe, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.